Anne asked me, so I think that's where we should start. Anne asked me to speak on how Old Graaff Reinet house was built. Am I correct? That is more or less what you asked me. Now, that started me thinking when I finally kind of applied my mind to the topic. What makes building a Graaff Reinet, or any house for that matter, in any place, what makes it different to building a house today? Isn't it really basically the same thing? Firstly, I think today we regard houses as a product. It's consumer society. A house is an end product. You know, it's a product. We don't really worry too much about the process. But in the earlier days, it was quite different. Process was everything. The product wasn't, obviously you wanted the end product to be, you know, fit for purpose, etc. But it wasn't so product driven as it is today, or end product driven as it is today. Now, that brings to the topic of what we generally speak about vernacular architecture. So we have to address the subject, what is vernacular, and why would we term it architecture rather than merely building? Because there is I guess, a difference. Now, vernacular, if you look up vernacular in the dictionary, it pertains quite often to language. Talking about vernacular, it's talking the mother tongue, you could say, of people that stay in a certain area. Now, it's similar with architecture. It's architecture that's related to a certain area, and specifically related to ordinary buildings, not monumental buildings. Now, it's a very broad subject, let me just add. So I'm just kind of flicking around. There's a massive amount of research that can and has been done on it, and it's multifaceted, as you can well imagine. So I'll try to give a kind of an overview of how I see it. So to go back to the earliest times, what record do we have of the earliest kind of buildings in Graaff Reinet? And what descriptions do we have? We have very little pictorial evidence, obviously, because photographs didn't exist at that time, and not many people were maybe adept or inclined to sketch things. So we don't really know. We have the earliest description that I'm aware of Graaff Reinet. It was described by John Barrow in 1797. We described Graaff Reinet as an assemblage of mud huts making up a kind of a street. Now, I think John Barrow was a British colonial employee, so he was probably fairly paternalistic about it. And he probably felt that he was superior to the people that lived in the sticks in a far-flung colony. But be that as it may, I doubt if it was anything great in 1797. So then the question arises, once again, what do we know? Well, there's nothing left of that. I mean, there are no mud huts left in Graaff Reinet at all of that age. So what did these things actually look like, and what were they? Now, the only place that one really can look that could have some kind of similarity or relationship to what those structures were is on farms in the countryside. So, and they were also well described by travellers. So maybe that'll give you some kind of idea of where we started. So, okay, that's can everybody see? I'm kind of standing in front of the. That is probably. I don't know, Johannes, weet jy of jy vroeë sketses van Graaff Reinet? But that is a sketch of Graaff Reinet from the fording of the Sundays River in the south end of what is now Church Street, looking north. And you can actually clearly recognize the topography, Magazine Hill with Oberg and the Groothoek Mountains, etc., Menskop and so on in the background. The profile's pretty obvious. But I'll come back to this picture later. Now, nobody did the trouble of sketching a typical Sneuberg house, but this is once again Burchell. He sketched out a typical House of Velkornet Snyman in the Roggeveld. Now, I can give descriptions of what was said about Sneuberg houses. You bear with me, I have to read them because I've not memorized. The traveller O.F. Menzel reported in 1780, there are very few farmers who do not build their own houses. Now, you must listen to this. And make the rafters as well as the thatched roof. Of course, one can see that no master mason and master carpenter have made it. But the farmer makes shift with what he can have and not with what he would like to have. Okay, so that's the first one. That was in 1780. Second one relates to the farm Jagpoort. I think everybody knows more or less where Jagpoort is. It's just other side Loodsburg Pass, in what would now be the Middelburg district. And this comes from the travellings of the journal of the travellings of a man by the name of Paravicini di Capelli. Now, he was the aide-de-camp of the governor of the Cape at the time, which I guess would have been De Mist, 1803. Janssens or De Mist. Jagpoort was the farm of Johannes Jacobus Krier at the time. And he describes it as follows. The main building is a rectangular mud hut with low walls, 5 feet in height, and a reed thatch over rough timbers, being the branches of trees strung in place with thongs of hide. There are openings for a door and 2 windows, the latter closed with frames fashioned of spars of branches. As there is a separate hut or a kookhuis, now I'll show that there now. Outside for cooking, the house has no chimney. We made a fire in the middle of the floor, of the mud floor, and the smoke escaped through the holes in the roof and the windows. So you can see it was pretty rudimentary, and that was in 1803. Then, in 1823, George Thompson wrote, the farmhouses of the Sneuberg and most of the colder districts of the colony are usually of the following description. The house resembles a large barn divided into 2 or 3 apartments. One of these is the kitchen, which also serves for the sitting and eating apartment. In the others, the family sleep, while the outer one, visitors and travellers are accommodated, with a rush mat, a feather bed, and a coverlet spread on the clay floor. The more wealthy and long-settled families, however, usually have the kitchen separate from their sitting room. In such houses, curtained beds and other articles of decent furniture are not infrequently found. But the poorer classes are content with a few thong-bottomed chairs and stools, 2 or 3 wagon chests, and a couple of deal tables. The houses, being without ceilings, are open to the thatch, and the rafters are generally hung full of the ears of Indian corn, leaves or rolls of tobacco, slices of dried meat called biltong. Okay, so that gives you some idea of the typical, fairly general, if you want to call it humble, typical farmhouse around the turn of the 19th century, between 1700, late 1700s and early 1800s. But then if you read a description, and I'm specifically reading this for, if I can find it now once again, of that Liechtenstein wrote in 1806, of Renosterfontein. Now, I don't know if anybody of you are aware of Renosterfontein. People, Dave, you should know Renosterfontein. It's actually now, it's close by, but further near Maritzburg. It's now Grootplaas. It's now Grootplaas. Now, and I've been there a few times, and I cannot fathom that this ever existed on what was described here. That this ever existed at that homestead, unless it was somewhere else. It's all disappeared. I don't know. Okay, it says here, Renosterfontein, near the watershed of the Buffalo River. On the evening of this day, we reached one of the highest habitations among the snow mountains, called Renosterfontein, belonging to a certain Barenberger. Barenberger comes up a lot, who had been one of the who had been once a principal magistrate of Graaff Reinet and had filled his office with particular rectitude and dignity. According to universal suffrage, he was one of the most honest and intelligent persons in the whole colony. And in support of this opinion, it is to be observed that very few farms could be compared to his farm. The fertility of the ground, of which I have already spoken, is here by no means an extraordinary abundance, spring carried to the utmost height. Every drop of water that the spring yields is collected with the utmost care and conducted about the land by little channels, on which is a mile in, one of which is a mile in length, and leads to the richest part of the land. Extensive orchards producing excellent peaches, apricots, pomegranates, even bananas. You wouldn't believe that. Figs, grapes, almonds and oranges in the greatest abundance and of the very best quality. So I think there may be a bit of exaggeration going on here. In the lower parts was spread out the stubbles of very extensive cornfields, and in the evening numerous flocks and herds of sheep, goats and cattle, horses, returned home from their pastures. Burger has employed a part of his wealth in building a dwelling house, which is another interesting part, such as is really to be seen in the colony, at least in a country so destitute of wood as the Snow Mountains. The houses here are in general built in the same style as the huts in the Roggeveld, and he refers to that in the Roggeveld. Around about the dwelling house, I didn't point that out. Around about the dwelling house are a number of small, neat buildings for slaves and Hottentots, for barns, storehouses, workrooms, etc., etc. Even in the neighbourhood of Cape Town, not many farms are to be seen that have a greater appearance of comfort and affluence. Now, that's a glowing description compared to the previous ones, and it's contemporary. I mean, it's 1806. So what does that make one believe? It makes one believe that, obviously, if you were affluent, you could build better things, which makes sense. But it also makes one understand what the process was. And that there was a continuum. There wasn't only one style or one way of building or one standard kind of plan form or the superiority or inferiority. It was a continuum from very lowly structures to something that was quite, in even today's terms, is quite decent. So, and that is where the vernacular threshold that was referred to previously comes in. Where does vernacular architecture start? Where is the vernacular threshold? Now, there are various erudite people have written about, and it's a complicated thing because it's got to do with sociological things. It's got to do with, geographical. It's a whole, and there's a whole formula that certain people apply and plot it out on a graph, and then they can, with dates, and they can see, okay, that's the date that in a general area that you entered into the vernacular threshold, which is now when pure shelter becomes architecture. Now then the question, or vernacular architecture per se, now then the question is what is architecture? What makes architecture different from building or just a shelter? And I think the easiest way to describe it is to go back to the Roman philosopher come architect engineer, Vitruvius, who said for any building to be architecture or anything to be architecture, it should have firmness, commodity and delight. And if you want to kind of translate that into more kind of contemporary talk, its firmness would be structural. It must stand up, obviously, and have structural integrity. Commodities, it must fulfill its function for which it is intended. And then delight is obviously there must be something more than that. And that's where that must add to one's experience of life and add to general everyday life in terms of appearance or whatever. So its character must also give you some kind of good feel about it. It mustn't just be something that's simply utilitarian. Now,
when was he around, Peter?
Who? Vitruvius in Roman times.
Yeah, I know, sure.
I can't tell you the exact date when Vitruvius was around.
I mean, it was way before these settlements. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I know. In Roman times, we're talking about like maybe 100 AD or something. I'm not sure exactly when he lived.
That's quite a while.
Yeah. Maybe in BC. I'm not sure exactly when he lived. I didn't look that up. I mean, maybe somebody else here knows about Vitruvius and can. I mean, we did just when we were the Heritage Society went to Somerset East a while ago. Vitruvius also kind of came up, and I think in the when we looked at the mill there at Glenavon, that's a Vitruvian mill, and I mean that was also named after Vitruvius, who was, engineer, architect, and he kind of, I think, first described that kind of gearing and what have you, of the working of a mill. But that's just an aside. Now, okay, so I'm going to show a few images now of structures that I discovered out in the, and you'll be aware of these structures. I think a lot of pretty people that come on, who are farmers here, will be aware of these structures. You would have seen them in the veld, and I'm not claiming that they are what they are, because I don't know. But I think they are what that. A lot of them, I think, are those. I mean, there are some way out theories about this, but I'm not going to. I won't kind of entertain those for my purpose. Okay, so this is the Roggeveld house, and you heard what Lichtenstein said about the Sneuberg house is typical is similar to a Roggeveld house. Now there you can see a little thatched cottage with two structures next to it, two round structures next to it. Now one would have been a kookhuis, which was mentioned, where it was actually an outside kitchen, for want of a better word. And then the other one would have probably been storage or additional accommodation or something. But now that's a typical Roggeveld house. Okay, now I'm sorry, the images, that should have been one of my other disclaimers. It's fairly, my presentation's fairly monochromatic, and the color renditions are not that great, because all of it's from slides and or slides and black and white photographs that I had to scan, and in the scanning of it, it actually loses resolution and color and what have you. So that is a kind of a typical little structure that you may find in the veld. And I mean, there are many of them. Something like that as well. And I mean, they generally comply with that same kind of. Okay, and this would be a plan of one of them. I've called it a possible trekboer dwelling with kookhuis. So there you can see a two-roomed rectangular structure with a little round structure at the back. And the rectangular structures are normally still fairly high, say 5 or 6 feet high. But the kookhuis, or the little round shelter, is never high. It's always almost on the ground, almost just a foundation, which leads one to believe it actually was a structure that was like a very light structure that was built onto the ground. There's another fairly interesting one. 2 rooms with a hearth, so it obviously had an internal kitchen. And this is on Baviaanskrans, Deep Highlands. Yeah, beyond New Bethesda. And there's an interesting structure. I say unknown function there. But if you read a lot of the travellers also speak about a structure where the farmers could retreat when they were under attack. And I'm wondering if that isn't something like that. And normally they were, and that's when I say under attack by sand, normally. And they also describe those structures as with a heavy flat clay roof on heavy spars. So that wouldn't have been a thatched roof structure. Obviously that could be burnt. So it was something different. And I'm wondering if that isn't one of those. I don't know. And there's another little hut at the top there, right on a water course. So, I mean, they normally are near water for obvious reasons. And this one is kind of a bit more sophisticated because it's got an internalised hearth in the kitchen. Now if you can see you see the walls are all around 2 meters high, generally. This is Taiboskraal, near Taiboskraal, Klipfontein. Okay, here we've got one that's now in the Kamdeboer. Note the difference in materials. You generally find that in the mountainous areas where stone is plentiful, you can pick up stone off, right around you. The stone's probably not that plentiful in a kind of river valley. So their clay was used. Here's, as that would be termed opgekleide mure or cob. It was actually, they used earth and stacked it and let it dry and stacked blocks, sods of earth on top of each other. And that's what that looks like from the other side. Now, once again, I have got a little plan of this, which is a bit not that great, but it's a T-plan construction.
Peter, how did they treat the mud blocks so that they didn't just melt?
Well, it was normally they used dung, cow dung, and it's a whole process. Even today, if you make a peach pip floor, I'm not sure what the English term would be for it, but you actually mix. There's a ratio of mixing the earth. You've first got to find decent clay earth. It must be sufficiently clayey. Mustn't be too loamy or too sandy, otherwise it doesn't sit together. And then you mix cow dung in it, and you really mix it up well, and then you leave it throw it out, pile it up in a heap, and leave it for 5 days or so. And as they say, I don't know what the chemical process that takes place, but they say it's ingesuur. It's called ingesuur. And then if you actually use that, it becomes hard. It becomes very hard. But there are various earth technologies where earth can be used, and it is relatively durable. But I mean, this thing has probably been standing there for 200 years without a roof on it. As I said, it's a T-plan, and you can see from the structure that it was first built as a row of rooms, and then the back part was added on later. It's another view of it, and there was a bakwoond as well, which is what's remaining there. So that's the kind of plan. I just must have found, this is a long time ago, 1991. So clearly I found a piece of paper that I had knocking around somewhere and just scribbled down what I'd seen. It's not to scale or anything. But the paper's turned yellow over time, so that's why it's so yellow. I just scanned it. So there you can see the 3 rooms that were built obviously at the same time. It would have been a bedroom, voorkamer and kitchen. A little wall was added in later on. And you can see there are little alcoves for storing things in. There's little alcoves there and one over there. And they had a kitchen with an internalised hearth, which is also quite grand. And then obviously later on, they added a room at the back. That would have been, no. That would have been probably east or west facing. They quite often were east facing. Quite often. But there are many exceptions. It depends on the topography and so on. This is now a bit more sophisticated. But yeah, okay. This is Let's Kraal. I think everybody know, kind of a lot of people know Let's Kraal. It's quite a famous farm. Used to be of Andries Pretorius. But lately Johan Minnaar had, and he sold now to the Neers. But that is the house on Let's Kraal as I first saw it in 1992. So the black walls are the original parts, and then all the other different colours are different periods of addition. Okay, this is my reconstruction of what Let's Kraal possibly was. 3 rooms with a room at the back once again.
Does the rain not affect those bricks?
But clay? No, it does.
It does, they don't melt.
It does eventually, but it takes a long time. Okay, there we're getting a bit, it's a bit more sophisticated, this house, but it's once again in that same continuum. Now there are photographs of what it looks like more or less now. I think this was taken on a Heritage Society excursion. So maybe you can see familiar people. Okay, so that's what it basically looks like today.
What would the original roof have been?
It would have been thatched. I'll get there. Well, please remind me, because I could forget. That's what it looks like from the back. And that's the interior shot. Okay, and there's the roof. That's what the roof looks like, and that's quite important for understanding this whole thing of construction and materials, available materials. The interesting things that you can see from this photograph. I don't know if anybody wants to hazard a guess. Except for the pears that are still lying on the shoulder. You see the pears here? No, all those were. Somebody said, "Are they saffraanpere? They raak nooit ryp nie."
Are those popular?
Those would be popular. That would be popular, yeah.
Was popular brought in here for
Popular was brought in here for building material. That's one of the things that I would
about when?
very early on, because there are records of established popular. I've actually got the count here somewhere. Early on, 1818, 1816, they're talking about popular. And the first kind of graphic proof I have of it is dated 1837 on the farm Droogrivier, formerly Droogrivier, now Sierplaas. Before you go over, Sierplaas worked at Maritzburg, that farm there. There was a poplar bush there in 1837. So poplar was brought in very early.
Where did the poplar originate from?
I'm not sure. Persia, where did poplar come from?
Canada.
I think there are various species.
Comes from Canada.
Mm.
Body somewhere else. The Canadescence is
Yeah.
the one that you
The one that you plant. Okay, but I'm sure there are various species. I wouldn't know what the old ones are at all.
Peter, that empty bottle there, did they make alcohol out of this, or would they have been Whitlock? Maybe Whitlock.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, the interesting thing here is you notice that everything's blackened. There's a wall, a gable that extends into the roof, and everything is blackened in there. You know, it's kind of like sooty or black. Now, that leads me to believe that this room, and I can go back one, I think, if I can. Okay, there. That was the kitchen, and the kitchen never had a ceiling. And this wall extended up into the roof space to obviously cut off the rest of the ceiling space, and it acted as a kind of a fire break to the remainder of the house.
Sorry, what's where the kitchen is now?
It's another room, just a room. It's a bedroom or something now. The kitchen they added on later. So the kitchen that's currently there is a later edition of unknown vintage, really. The other interesting thing is the roof construction. And that also pertains to the availability of material. The roof construction is a rafter system that requires heavy beams at far greater centers. You can see here, or heavy timber sections. Those would have probably been every 1.5 meters, say, I guess. And then there were purlins over the top of it. If you understand what purlins are. There is a kind of sectional sketch of it. And then over the top of those purlins were what could be called common rafters. Oh, and there was a ridgepole. You can see there's a ridgepole over here. So the common rafters lay on top of the ridgepole and on those purlins. And on top of that, they put their thatching battens, and which they tied their thatch to. The reason why they did this, I feel, is because of the scarcity of heavy timbers. So you still probably had the same massive timber, quantity of timber, and the massive timber in the roof, but it was of a lesser section. You required far less heavy timbers to make the roof stand. Okay. Now we going up the scale. This is Mikey's Vlei, Mikey's Valley, Vlakplaas, Graaff Reinet. And you'll be aware of, I think a lot of you will be aware of this ruin as well. It's a ruin now. When you, on the way to Richmond, when you go up Osfontein Hoogte, then you go behind the flat mountain, I don't know what its name is, and then you make it like a turn. There's quite a wide open expanse of veld. And in the middle of that is Mikey's Valley, or Vlakplaas. And this is the house that stands there, or stood there, it's now a ruin. But it was a substantial dwelling. And I mean, it's of age, I'm not sure how old it is, but it's very old. So it had a big voorhuis, big living room, and then another little room, probably dining room, and a kitchen at the back. And that was all built at once. It was not an add-on, it was all built at once. And little storerooms and a solder trap. So this is like the quintessential Sneuburg, very affluent farmer Sneuburg house. But what's interesting about this house, this doesn't really relate to the structure per se, are these two flanking walls. They're the biggest stones I have ever seen. I don't know how they got them there. They clearly more than 2 meters long and probably 500 millimeters wide. I don't know, can't remember. I don't know if they appear in the pictures, but they're massive blocks of stone. I really don't know how they transported them there. But this house relates to it relates to the same period as Let's Crawl, I think, which is kind of where this threshold takes place, where this becomes a piece of architecture rather than just a shelter. But that is a pioneer dwelling on the farm Sierkloof. Now, if you're aware of the Buffelshoek Valley, Nooitgedacht, Petersburg, that's almost right at the upper end of that valley, I think the second last farm. And those are the mountains in the background there. Now, this is a particularly interesting structure because it's contrary to the norm. Normally the houses were built with the contours for obvious reasons. It's much easier, I mean, you don't have to deal with level changes so much and so on. But this one was built almost across 90 degrees to the contours. Now, and it was clever in that way because it allowed the wagon house and the actual dwelling house to be in the same building, and the door was high enough for the tented wagon to go in at the lower end. So that's quite unusual. And that is what that house's roof structure looks like. The thatch is still there, or what remains of it. Exactly the same kind of roof structure as at Let's Crawl. And here you can identify the timbers. Many of them, they're not poplar. It's found timber. It's trees that they probably chopped in the river courses. There's white stinkwood and there's normal thorn tree wood. So it's made from found material. The gable that you see there is not original. I don't think it's original. Because I don't think I have a photograph of it, but that house was built with stone on the outside and opgeklei on the inside, mud on the inside. Okay, here's a typical what I spoke about with the Afrikaans names. This is actually a Kapstyle house. I'm sure if you know Pinkie in the ruins on the coast there near Agulhas, there are many Kapstyle houses. It's famous for the Kapstyle house. Now, Kapstyle house is basically almost like a roof that stands on the ground as a house. So here you have what I spoke about. Kapbalken, which are the main trusses, if you want to call them that. They're not really trusses. With a tie beam, with the purlins on top, and then a common rafter over the top with a ridge pole. Okay, the things have got a bit shuffled. This is now Mikey's Fay again. Interesting. This was before the advent of Google Earth, and this was done from a map and walking around, recorded. So it's relatively accurate, I suppose, but it's not to the standards that you would be able to do it today. But it's quite interesting because there the house is up top there. There was an outbuilding, there was a crawl, there's other stuff that I don't know what it was. There were graves there. There was an orchard right at the top there, and there's a watercourse, river, tributary of the Blaukrans River. And then there was this long enclosure in stone. The land was enclosed with a massively long stone wall, and that's the black line. And inside it was a threshing floor, or what remains of a threshing floor. So that's what it kind of looks like. There the wall is, there the house is over there. And that's what the buildings look like, currently look like. Well, it probably looks worse now. I mean, this was in 1990 something. Okay, that's the inside wall of the kitchen. And you can see where the hearth was built out. You can see the two things, the brick sticking out of the wall where the hearth was built in. And the opening for the oven. And that's now the construction. Once again, stone on the outside and clay on the inside. Okay, that's what remains of the threshing floor. Okay, I included this because it shows a poplar bush. Droge rivier. Poplar bush and weak spring indicated there. These diagrams are actually, these are all copies from that made by the Surveyor General from the originals. They don't allow you to access the originals. So these are all drawn out from the originals. Okay, we're back to that. Okay, now building material. Obviously the available building material, if you can glean from what I've shown, the available building material actually determined pretty much how the things were constructed. It didn't determine form as much, but it determined how they were, the material that they used, obviously the availability. And there we now have to look at that whole gradient once again, that from humble to fairly affluent. If you were poor, you obviously couldn't afford to, or relatively poor and not permanent. If you were sedentary, you could. But if you were migratory, a lot of these farmers were still trekboere. They were still wandering around. They never actually had a piece of ground. And they just grazed and they moved on. So, and building material, the poorer ones used building materials that they were close to the site, that they could find very close to the site. And the more affluent you became, the more you could afford to import materials from elsewhere. Now, many people always ask me, where did the yellowwood come from? You know, there's a lot of yellow. Where did the yellowwood come from? And I think a lot of people still assume that it came from the Southern Cape. And some of it may have, I'm not sure, but it would appear from what the travellers say that the bulk of the yellowwood actually came from Bosberg. It was used locally, from Bosberg and Baviaansrivier, used now further east, beyond Bedford area. So that's what the writings say. So it would be interesting to actually, I'm sure it could be tested. If you took a sample, I'm sure somebody could actually, they do the genetic test, see where people came from. So I'm sure they could tell you where the trees also grew when they were still alive. So obviously you can imagine to transport a significant amount of wood to build a decent house. From Bosberg or from Baviaansrivier or from even further. Took a reasonable amount of effort and a reasonable amount of money to be able to do that. Now, also in the gradient is, I did mention in a previous one of the descriptions that the farmers built their own houses. Now, that's also in that same gradient. If you had enough money, you'd employ some artisan to do it. But the thing about vernacular architecture is that even though you employed an artisan to maybe build your house, that's why there are no drawings, by the way, or to you that. You point an artisan to do your work. You all spoke the same language. You knew you want a house with that and that, and you knew you were going to get what you wanted, because you all had the same understanding of the tradition, of the building tradition, which is something quite foreign to us today. I mean, you tell someone you want a house, so there's that. I mean, it just doesn't work like that anymore. So yeah, I don't know if there are any questions so far. So now I'll get back to Graaff Reinet now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask about vernacular. Why do we use bricks when stones are so prolific in Africa?
Yeah.
And that's obviously a Dutch or an English custom, I presume.
I think it's a lot easier to work with bricks if you can afford to make bricks and have the time to make bricks. Remember, it's a time-consuming operation. Then you use them because you could work more quickly with bricks. They're easier to build with, and you can build more intricate things with bricks that you maybe can't do with stone. I mean, for instance, it's very difficult to build a gable with stone. You can, but it just becomes more difficult because the stones are heavy. You've got to lift them. So brick was probably preferred because it was easier to work with.